I didn't say a word. I just stood there in my own living room, holding a dish towel, listening to my son tell me that I needed to give them some space. My son, in my house. I remember the exact smell of that evening. Pot roast in the oven. The faint sweetness of the candle I always kept burning near the front window. I'd had that candle for years. Lavender and vanilla. My husband Howard used to say it smelled like a Sunday afternoon. Howard had been gone 4 years by then, and I still bought the same candles. Some habits you hold on to them because letting go feels like forgetting. That was the problem, I think. I held on to too many things I should have let go of. And I held on to people who had already decided I didn't matter. My name is Beverly. I'm 68 years old. I lived in a 4-bedroom house in Marietta, Georgia, the same house Howard and I bought in 1991, when the neighborhood still had unpaved sidewalks and a little hardware store on the corner that everyone called Donnie's. We raised 2 children in that house. We painted the kitchen 3 times trying to find the right shade of yellow. We buried our dog Pepper in the backyard under the oak tree. That house was not just where I lived. That house was the physical proof of everything Howard and I had built together. When Howard died, heart attack sudden, he was here and then he wasn't. I didn't sell. Everyone said I should. Too much house for one person, they said. Too many memories. But I couldn't. I genuinely could not imagine sleeping anywhere else. So I stayed and I rattled around in those 4 bedrooms and I made peace with the quiet. For about 2 years it was fine. Hard, but fine. I had my neighbor Gwen across the street who came over for coffee twice a week. I had my church group on Thursdays. I had my daughter Elaine calling every Sunday like clockwork, and my son Nathan calling whenever he remembered, which was less clockwork and more like a surprise every time. Nathan is the younger one. He was always the easier child, which I know sounds like a terrible thing to say about your own son, but I mean it kindly. He was easygoing, didn't argue, made friends without trying. What I didn't see until much later was that some of that easygoing nature was really just an inability to push back on anyone, including his wife. His wife's name is Cheryl. I want to be careful about how I describe Cheryl, because when I look back now, I don't think she was a bad person in the way that word usually means. She wasn't cruel exactly. She was just certain that she knew best, certain that she knew best, certain that what she wanted was what the situation required, certain that her comfort was the logical center of any arrangement. She had a way of making her preferences sound like facts, and her facts sound like the only reasonable conclusion any sensible person could reach. The first time I met Cheryl, at a dinner Nathan brought her to maybe 6 months into their relationship, she spent 45 minutes explaining to me why she didn't like ceiling fans. Not just that she didn't like them, why. Something about the noise and the uneven air circulation. I remember nodding and thinking, well, okay, she's particular. I didn't know yet that particular was going to move into my house and rearrange my kitchen cabinets. They came to me in March, 2 years after Howard passed. Nathan called first, which I appreciated. He said they were having a hard time. Cheryl's company had done layoffs, she'd lost her job, and they were 3 months behind on their apartment lease. They had a daughter, my granddaughter Phoebe, who was 9 at the time. He asked if they could stay with me just for a few months, while Cheryl found something new and they got back on their feet. I said yes. Of course I said yes. Nathan is my son. Phoebe is my granddaughter. What kind of grandmother says no to that? I told them I had 3 rules. Pay the utilities while you're here, respect my space, and keep the kitchen the way I keep it. Nathan laughed and said, Mom, that's the easiest deal I've ever heard. I should have gotten that in writing. The first month was fine. Cheryl was job hunting, so she was on her laptop most of the day, and she was quiet and mostly kept to herself. Phoebe was a joy, a sweet, curious little girl who liked to sit on the kitchen counter and watch me cook and ask me why I did everything the way I did. She called me Grandma Bev. I loved her more than I can put into words. Around week 5, Cheryl started reorganizing. It started with the pantry. She said she'd done it to make more room. I walked in one morning, and everything was in different places. My canned goods alphabetized by brand, my spices moved to the bottom shelf she could reach without a step stool, my baking things in a bin on the highest shelf, even though I bake twice a week. I mentioned it to Nathan that evening. He said she was just trying to help Mom. I moved things back and didn't say anything else. 2 weeks later, she replaced my shower curtain in the hall bathroom. Didn't ask. Just put the old one, which was perfectly good, in the hall closet and hung a new one she'd ordered online. Grey geometric pattern. I'd had yellow daisies. I didn't say anything because she was living there, and I thought, reasonably I think, that she should have some comfort in the space. By month 3, Cheryl had a part-time position doing remote bookkeeping. Not the salary she'd had before, but something. I genuinely thought they'd start looking for a place. Instead, she came home one evening and said she'd looked into it and apartment rents in their old neighborhood had gone up significantly, and it made more sense financially to stay with me a while longer. Nathan nodded beside her like she was presenting a board report. I said okay. I didn't know what else to say. By month 5, her mother started coming by on weekends. Her mother's name is Brenda, and I want to be fair here. Brenda was perfectly pleasant to my face, but she had a habit of arriving unannounced on Saturday mornings and staying through Sunday dinner. My Sunday dinners, the ones I cooked. She would compliment a food in a way that somehow felt like she was grading it, say things like, "Oh, Beverly, you use real butter. How fun," and then sit in the armchair Howard used to sit in and watch television at a volume I found difficult to think through. I mentioned to Nathan that it was hard for me when Brenda came by without notice. He looked uncomfortable and said he'd talk to Cheryl. Whatever that conversation was, Brenda continued showing up on Saturdays. The only difference was that Nathan stopped making eye contact with me on those days. Month 7. They hadn't paid the utilities in 2 months. Nathan said things were tighter than expected and asked if I could cover it for now. I did. It was $412. I told myself it was temporary. I also gave them $1,200 in month 8, when Cheryl said Phoebe needed dental work and their insurance hadn't kicked in yet on her new job. Of course I gave it. Phoebe needed dental work. You don't say no to that. What I didn't understand yet was that the money and the space were not separate issues. They were the same issue. Both were things I had that they had decided quietly and without discussion were now available to them by default. Month 9 is when things started to change in a way I couldn't ignore. Cheryl began referring to the house as our place in conversations with her friends. I heard her on the phone once saying, "Yeah, come over to our place, I'll text you the address." She didn't introduce it as her mother-in-law's house, just our place, like I was a roommate. Then Phoebe's bedroom, the guest room, was repainted without my permission. I came home from my Thursday church group to find 2 gallons of lavender paint and drop cloths covering my hardwood floors. Cheryl said Phoebe had been asking for a purple room, and she'd found a great deal on paint and figured you wouldn't mind. The floor had a drip stain on it that didn't come fully out. I did not handle it well. I told Cheryl that this was my house and she needed to ask before changing anything. She looked at me with this expression, patient, like she was explaining something to a child, and said, "Beverly, we've been here almost a year. I think we all need to treat this like a shared home." I said it was not a shared home. It was my home. She said, "I'm just saying a little flexibility goes a long way." Nathan was in the kitchen when this happened. He heard every word. He said nothing. I went to bed that night and cried in a way I hadn't since the week Howard died, not because of the paint or the floor, because of Nathan standing in that kitchen saying nothing. The following weekend, Brenda arrived Saturday morning as usual, and this time she brought her sister. Nobody asked me. Cheryl made brunch in my kitchen for 5 people using my groceries, and I sat at my own kitchen table feeling like a guest who'd overstayed. Phoebe sat next to me and quietly slipped her hand into mine under the table. She didn't say anything. She just held my hand. 9 years old, and she was the only person in that room who seemed to understand that something was wrong. I excused myself and went to sit in the backyard near the oak tree where we'd buried Pepper. I sat there for a long time. I called my daughter Elaine that afternoon. She lives in Cincinnati, and I hadn't told her how bad things had gotten because I hadn't wanted to worry her, and honestly, I hadn't wanted to say out loud what I was starting to understand. But I told her then. All of it. The money. By that point, roughly $9,000 between utilities and the dental bill, and 2 other smaller things I'd let slide without mentioning. The paint. The pantry. Brenda's sister at my kitchen table. Elaine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, you need to talk to someone. A real someone, not just me." She meant a lawyer. I knew she meant a lawyer. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday with an attorney named Mr. Castillo, whose office was 3 miles from my house. I paid the consultation fee out of my own pocket, $150, and I sat down across from him and told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, he told me a few things I needed to know. First, because Nathan and Cheryl had been living in the property for over a year, they had tenant rights under Georgia law, which meant I couldn't simply ask them to leave and expect them to be gone by morning. I would need to provide proper written notice. The required notice period would depend on our arrangement, but could be 30 days or longer. Second, the money I'd given them, the utilities, the dental bill, the other amounts, would be nearly impossible to recover without a written loan agreement, which I didn't have. He wasn't unkind about it. He just told me the truth. Third, I could start the process any time I chose, and there was nothing illegal about what I was planning. He gave me a written notice template to fill out. I thanked him and drove home. I did not tell Nathan and Cheryl where I'd been. I spent the next 3 weeks being very quiet and very normal. I made pot roast on Sundays. I let Brenda sit in Howard's chair. I said, of course, and no problem, and that's fine in all the right places. Inside, I was doing something different entirely. I called my bank and moved a portion of my savings into a separate account Cheryl had no knowledge of. I catalogued every dollar I'd given Nathan and Cheryl in a notebook I kept in my nightstand. I gathered the original deed to the house, my will, my insurance documents, and put them in a safety deposit box at a branch across town. I took photographs, the paint drip on the hardwood floor, the replaced shower curtain, the reorganized pantry, and I saved them. And I wrote the letter, the formal 30-day notice, the way Mr. Castillo had shown me. I typed it, printed it, and signed it. I had it notarized at the UPS store on a Tuesday morning while Nathan was at work and Cheryl was on a call. I dated it for the following Sunday evening. That Sunday I cooked dinner, as I always did. Pot roast again, because I like pot roast and it was my kitchen. Phoebe helped me make biscuits and got flour on her nose, and we both laughed. It was a good afternoon, actually. That part was real. After dinner, after Phoebe had gone to her purple room to read, I asked Nathan and Cheryl to sit with me at the kitchen table. Cheryl had that expression again, the patient one, like she already knew how to handle whatever I was going to say. I put the envelope on the table between us. I said, "This is a formal 30-day notice to vacate. I've had it notarized. There's a copy here for each of you." Nathan looked at the envelope and then at me. I watched something cross his face. Surprise first, then something I couldn't read. He said, "Mom, you can't be serious." I said I was completely serious. Cheryl did not reach for the envelope. She leaned back and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen from her before, something underneath the patient layer, something sharper. She said, "We don't have anywhere to go, Beverly. We have a child." I said, "You have 30 days to make arrangements. Mr. Castillo's information is included if you have legal questions." She said, "You're doing this over a paint color?" Over some sleepovers with my mother." "Are you serious right now?" I said, "I'm doing this because this is my home and I'd like to live in it." Nathan didn't say much. He just sat there. That was the thing that hurt most, and also helped me most, if I'm being honest. Watching my son sit there saying nothing and realizing that this had not started that Sunday evening. His saying nothing had been going on for a year. The next 30 days were not comfortable. Cheryl barely spoke to me. Nathan oscillated between avoiding my eyes and having short, pained conversations that went nowhere. Brenda did not come that Saturday or the Saturday after. Phoebe, bless her heart, seemed to understand very little of the adult weather in the house and kept coming to sit with me in the kitchen, kept asking me to teach her things: how to make cornbread, how to repot a plant, how to iron a blouse without burning the collar. I taught her all of it. On day 26, Nathan came and sat with me in the backyard. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry, I should have said something a long time ago." I said, "Yes, you should have." He said, "I didn't know how to be in the middle." I told him there was no middle. There was his wife and there was his mother. And when his wife was treating his mother wrong, there was really only one right place to stand. He didn't argue with that. We sat quietly for a while. The oak tree had budded early that year, little green points coming out all along the branches. He said, "Will you be okay?" I said I had been okay before they came and I would be okay after. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Smyrna on day 30. I helped them load the truck because Phoebe was watching, and I wanted her to see that hard things could end with dignity and not with screaming. She hugged me in the driveway for a long time. She whispered, "I'll come visit, right, Grandma Bev?" I said, "Absolutely. Any time, call me first." She laughed. I went back inside and stood in my kitchen for a moment. The pantry was still the way Cheryl had organized it. I spent 40 minutes putting everything back the way I'd had it. Then I lit a lavender vanilla candle and sat down at my own kitchen table with a cup of coffee in my own house, in the quiet I had built and paid for and earned, and I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. I felt like myself. I want to say something because I've had a lot of time to think about all of this, and I know some people will wonder why I waited so long. I've asked myself that too. The honest answer is that love makes you give things extra time and a little more time after that. I kept thinking the situation would correct itself. I kept believing that Nathan would find his footing. I kept holding on to the version of my son I knew before all of this, the easygoing boy who used to fall asleep on the couch watching baseball. But I also know now that waiting too long has a cost. Not just the $9,000, though I won't pretend that isn't real. The cost is the smaller thing, the slow erosion of feeling at home in your own home. The way you start apologizing for being in a room, the way you start planning your own movements around other people's convenience. You don't notice it happening. That's the part nobody tells you. You don't notice. Until one day you're sitting in your own backyard, next to a tree where your dog is buried, because you needed to get away from your own kitchen. That's when you know. Howard used to say, "Beverly, you are too generous for your own good." He'd say it with a smile, so it never felt like a warning. I think about that now, and I think he was both complimenting me and telling me something true. I am generous. I am. But generosity that goes unreciprocated and unacknowledged for long enough stops being generosity and starts being something else. It starts being an expectation. And once it's an expectation, you've lost something that's very hard to get back. Phoebe called me last Sunday. She'd just turned 10. She said they had cake and that the apartment was okay, but it didn't smell like my house. I asked her what my house smelled like. She thought about it and said, like something good is about to happen. I told her she could come visit any time she wanted. I meant it. Some days Nathan calls and we talk. It's careful still, the way things are after they've been broken and put back together. You can see the seam, but he calls. That's something. I still have the oak tree. I still have the lavender candle. I still have the yellow daisy shower curtain I put back up the morning after they left. This is my home. It took me too long to say that out loud, but I know it now down to the bone, and I won't forget it again. I think about the moment I sat in my own backyard, next to a tree where my dog is buried, in a yard I'd mowed every summer for 30 years, because I needed to get away from my own kitchen. That image stays with me. Not the anger, not the money, not even Nathan's silence. Just that image. A woman in her own backyard, a refugee in her own life. What happened to me didn't happen overnight. That's the part I want people to really hear. There was no single villain who swooped in and took something. There was just a slow, quiet accumulation of small moments where I said, it's fine, when it wasn't, where I moved my own canned goods back to the shelf they belonged on and then stopped moving them, where I heard the word our place and let it pass without correction. Every one of those moments was a choice. I made them because I loved my son and I wanted to be generous and I did not want to be the difficult mother-in-law. That's not a terrible reason. But good intentions don't protect you from bad outcomes. They just make the bad outcomes feel more confusing. There's a kind of wisdom, not book wisdom, but the kind that only comes from living through something that I wish I'd had 20 years earlier. It's the wisdom to know the difference between generosity and erosion. Real generosity is a gift. You give it freely, and it doesn't cost you your sense of self. Erosion looks like generosity from the outside, but inside it's something else. It's the slow giving away of your own ground, because you're afraid of what standing firm might cost you. I was so afraid of losing Nathan that I was willing to lose myself first. That's not love, that's fear wearing love's clothing, and the practical intelligence I needed wasn't complicated. Mr. Castile's advice cost me $150 and an afternoon. The notebook where I tracked every dollar cost me nothing. The photographs of the paint drip and the replaced shower curtain, I took those on a phone I already owned. The tools were always there. I just had to be willing to use them. And for a long time I wasn't, because using them meant admitting that the situation had become what I could already see it had become. The part I'm most proud of isn't the 30-day notice, though I am proud of that. The part I'm most proud of is that I did it quietly. I didn't scream. I didn't make Phoebe watch her grandmother fall apart. I cooked pot roast. I taught her how to make biscuits. And then, when the time was right, I put an envelope on the table and I said what needed to be said with a steady voice. That steadiness wasn't easy. I'd been practicing it without knowing it for 30 years of hard mornings and harder decisions. Steadiness isn't something you perform when the moment comes. It's something you've been building the whole time. Nathan calls now. Things between us are careful. Like I said, you can see the seam. But I think, in the long run, what happened was more honest than what came before it. Before, we had a relationship built partly on my willingness to disappear. Now we have something smaller and more real. I'll take real over comfortable any day. Phoebe asked me once why my house smells the way it does. I told her it's the candle, lavender and vanilla. She said it smells like something good is about to happen. I think she's right. I think that's exactly what it smells like.